How certain are you that this forest is Darken Wood, Raslin? How certain is one of anything, half-elven? The mage replied, I am not certain of drawing my next breath, but go ahead. Walk into the wood that no living man has ever walked out of. Death is life's one great certainty, Tanis. Hey! Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. I'm happy to see you today, and I'm very excited since we are going to be continuing with the book Dragons of Autumn Twilight, reading chapters 6 through 10. But really quick, before we get into the actual content, I just thought it'd be fun to show you my very favorite bookmark because I finally found it. I was so worried I had lost it, but I just figured all you book readers would really enjoy it. So here it is. It says, "Shh, I'm trying to read." It's the best bookmark ever. I've had it for a really long time, so just thought I'd share it with you. And it was really hilarious when I was younger. I used to flash this at my dad or my mom or whoever was trying to talk to me while I was reading, and it would just be like, go away, don't talk to me, I'm in the middle of a journey right now, don't talk to me. So anyway, let's go ahead and get on with our content for today. So again, we read chapters 6 through 10 for today. Let's start with our recap. So, first, they stay in the cave for the night, and they don't have very much food. Everyone's kind of high-strung, things like that. We learn more about Riverwind getting the staff as they continue their journey the next day. We discover the reptilian clerics on the road, and they have that battle, and they fight over it, over the staff. And we have that the reptiles turn to stone whenever they're stabbed and eventually crumble to dust, which of course is weird. And then they escape to the woods, and they follow the stag into Darken Wood, where the dead takes them to the centaurs. And we're kind of left on a little, not really on a cliffhanger, but a little bit on an intriguing moment where the centaurs have gone away and someone has started talking to them. All right. First things first that I wanted to mention that I had not gotten to last episode was the chapter titles and the pictures on the chapters. I just wanted to have a little bit more time to discuss or to read and look at them before I discussed it with you. So, for example, if we just look at the first chapter that we read for this week, chapter 6, the title is called Night in a Cave, Dissension, Tanis Decides. And we've got the picture of what I'm assuming is Tass's pouch with all his belongings that he throws out and everything like that. Looks like we've got a couple of rings in there, which one ends up being Tanis's. We've got a doll of some kind, some candles, a feather, a lot of just little knickknacks and things like that. The next one we have shows the clerics in their robes and stuff like that with their hands all bandaged up. And we've got, it's called The Story of the Staff, Strange Clerics, Eerie Feelings. And there's that one. Just, I'm sure you have it in front of you, but just in case you're misplaced your book or whatever, just thought I'd give them a little show to you. And I think that it's really important to discuss this because chapter titles and the pictures can be a way of knowing what's going to happen in the story or not know what's going to happen in the story, to mislead or correctly lead your readers. So as a reader and as a writer, it is important to understand the title chapters and any pictures that they decide to put with them, just because it adds a dynamic to the story. You have to consider what you want them to be, whether you want them to be exactly what's going to happen to give your readers a clue, or if you want to take away from what they expect from this. For example, of one that's a misleading one is if we go back to our previous readings, chapter 5, we have this picture in the stars of a woman's face. Looks like, in my opinion, constellations, which at the end of this chapter is when we find out the constellations are missing. And one of them is the Queen of Darkness. So you see that it's probably what they are depicting with these stars here. And it's called Farewell to Flint, Arrows Fly, Message in the Stars. But we don't really say goodbye to Flint in this chapter. We do think we're going to say goodbye towards the end of the chapter, but then he runs for the boat before the chapter ends and gets in the boat. So we already know that Flint is not gone. So that is a misleading chapter title. The other stuff, it is correct. We do have arrows that are flying, and we do have the message in the stars and the fact that they are missing. So it's kind of a mixed one on this one, but again, it's to give the readers a chance to look at this and be like, okay, what's going to happen to Flint? Well, nothing ends up happening to Flint, but we had to think about it. It's a way to mislead your reader. So whether you have chapter titles or you don't, in this case we do, it is very important to look at them and find out information from them. And as you're reading, it is important to read them, look at the picture, and see what the writer intended them to be for you. They intended for you to be misled by this chapter title. They intended for you to think that Flint was gone and to wonder about it the entire time, only to be like, oh, well, Flint's with us anyway. We didn't have to worry about it the whole time. Let's look at another one. Let's go back to chapter 6, the one that I just showed. Night in a cave, dissension, Tanis decides. That is pretty clear cut for what happens in this chapter. We do spend the night in the cave. There is dissension, people all having different opinions on what should happen, what shouldn't happen, and whatnot. And Tanis decides in the end what they're going to do. So pretty clear cut, and we have the picture that's pretty clear cut as well. Tass is going through his pouches, and we do see that scene with Tanis and him, and he's got all those maps and everything like that. So it's a pretty clear cut opening for this chapter. But again, not always. So it's always important to look at what's going to happen for those. And it's important as a writer and a reader on both aspects to know and try and understand what is happening with those chapter titles and why they chose to do those different images. All right. Next thing I want to discuss is to go back and take a second look at point of view. Because as I was reading, I realized that the point of view is not as clear-cut as I made it out to be last episode. Because to me, I kept wondering, is this really limited? Is it not? Is it possibly omniscient? And I kept going back and forth, and I had to really think about it. And I might not be right. I'd love to hear your opinions on the matter as well. I'd really like you to help me out. But point of view is one of the most important aspects of a book because it defines what you get as a reader, what information you're allowed to have, what point of view are we going to have, what kind of thoughts and feelings are we going to have, whose character are we going to get. So in this case, a lot of times it's Tanis. Not all the time, obviously we have like the switching and things like that, but a lot of times we're coming from Tanis's point of view. So that is important to know what information he's willing to give us, what he sees, what he notices, what he thinks about is everything that funnels the story to us. So it is very important to try and think of what the point of view is as a writer as well as a reader on both aspects. So let me see what I've got on my notes here that I wanted to mention. So this one being so hard to place, I find is interesting how they kind of made it ambiguous to what it could be. But as I thought about it and as I went through the book on these chapters, I decided to just really think about it, take in all the options. I've cataloged in my notes exactly when we switch, when we don't switch, whose perspective it is most of the time. And I've decided that I do think it is limited. At times I do wonder if it was omniscient because we do have the switching so often that I kind of second-guessed myself. But in the end, I decided that it is still limited because we are 90% of the time from Tanis's point of view. So 90% of the time, we see Tanis's thoughts. We see what he's doing. We see what he is seeing versus other characters. We do switch to those other characters, and we do have kind of an omniscient narrator at the beginning of a lot of the chapters, but most of the time it's coming from Tanis, and it does feel, for the most part, like Tanis's thoughts and feelings are more embedded in the text when we're from his point of view than an omniscient narrator. We do come across with how he's thinking and how he's feeling in his words, and his actions are being motivated by his thoughts and feelings. So I will say that I still think it is limited. But it's still tricky. As we continue to read, as we continue to discuss it, maybe we will decide on that it is omniscient. But we'll have to see. So don't worry. We will pin it down together. We'll work on it. We will think what it is. This first book is just really tricky on deciding what point of view it is. It's not so clear-cut as some other ones like Harry Potter, which is clearly a limited one because we only see Harry's point of view. Or something like a first person like Twilight, or any of those other books that are first person. So just go ahead, keep it in mind as we keep reading, decide what you think, let me know. We can talk about it again if we feel like we need to, because it is so important. And I also believe that it is important with this text to have the more ambiguous, is that the way you would say it? Ambiguous, the ambiguity of the point of view, because we have the little details that come from the other characters other than Tanis. We see a little bit of Tas, we see the characterization of a little bit of Strum and a little bit of Goldmoon, and it really helps us build mysteries because we don't always see the same things. We don't hear all the same conversations, as well as it gives us more knowledge in some aspects because we can switch between these different things. We build characterization because we switch between these different characters. And there's so many characters that it is necessary that we kind of coalesce them all together and not just put one perspective like it would be in hard, limited, and a first-person narrative. So Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman did do a really excellent job, not only with switching between the point of views, but also picking the correct amount of switching between them and getting that smoothly done, so that way it will work very well for our narrative here. But it is also good that we keep Tanis as our mostly focused on, at least at the moment. There might change, but Tanis is mostly the person that we're focused on because it keeps us grounded. We keep coming back to the same thing, and we keep understanding that this is our point of origin. Tanis is the main thing holding us grounded, so we know where we're going and what we're doing. The main way that we see us progress, so that we were not lost. We're not jumping here and there and there and there, back and forth, back and forth. We see Strum, we see Tanis, we see Strum. That would make us go crazy trying to keep up with whose point of view are we looking from. Whose point of view is telling us these things? What kind of thoughts are we hearing from which character? Where are we coming from? So we always come back to Tanis. And that's another reason why I think it's limited, because we keep him not only 90% of the time, but we don't switch between him and somebody else constantly. When it goes to Tas, we have a little section that is just Tas, so we know clearly who it is. We have a clear Raslin point of view. We have a clear point of view of when it's Strum, when it's Goldmoon. We have these clear sections and these clear signifiers, so that way we don't get lost in having too many characters trying to think and have the narrator trying to tell us too many things at one time. So, again, we decide to change our minds or whatever else, that is okay, but I felt like it needed a little bit more of a reworking, a little bit more depth, a little bit more of a pinpoint on why I thought it was limited, since I read it some more and I almost had some doubts. So hopefully that cleared up a bit for you as well, revisiting it and deciding what we thought. Please leave any comments, thoughts, feelings down below. I would really like to know if you agree with me, disagree with me, and why. All right, let's move to the next question. It's kind of a lead-in from this question. Is Tanis is the leader, but why? What do we get from Tanis being the leader of this group, as well as what do we think about Tanis being the leader of this group? We know that his companions think that he's smart and clear-headed and that because of his age, he really knows strategy, and he's been around in the world, so he knows what kind of things that need to be done as a leader to lead other people. They all really respect him and his opinions and his decisions. They think that he leads them correctly. And nobody seems to have stated that he became the leader because he had to be, or everyone elected him to be, or anything of that. It's that they just all have looked up to him, have known that he can make the decisions that they don't feel that they can. So he has been placed in this leadership position. And even after 5 years apart, they come back together and they're like, okay, yes, Tanis is the leader. We will follow his decision because we believe and respect in what he says and what he does. So I was thinking about how he's mostly the point of view that we see from as well. And I was wondering if there was a connection, possibly. I don't know whether the authors intended it to be a connection, or maybe they did. Not sure. But it does seem like there is some kind of connection between his point of view being the one that we are mostly looking at, as well as the point of being the leader of this group. So I have a question for all of you. There's not really a right or wrong answer. I'm just curious because I think it would be interesting to discuss. What do we think of this connection, and do we think that Tanis keeps us grounded? Because I talked about with the point of view is that we don't want to get lost in all the characters. We have so many characters, and we do need their perspective sometimes to either create the ambiguity or to create more clarity, as well as character development, things like that, because there is so many. But again, we need someone to hold us still. We need a point to keep us grounded in the story and know what is happening from one focal point. Do we think that Tanis is that for us? Because he is the leader and he's at the head of this group. Is it a good person to keep us grounded? Do we see a way that somebody else would be able to keep us grounded in this story? Was it the right choice or not? And I believe that actually he does. That's my point of view on this question, is that he does keep us grounded, that he does keep us in the focal point of where we want to be. He is the leading influence on this group, on where they go, what they do, how they get there, what paths to take, who to fight, who to hide from, those kind of things, which makes the dynamic of the story different than if we were to imagine as Tas being the leader or Strum being the leader. There is a completely different type of story that would be if they were the leader, or if their point of view was the main point of view. It would change the dynamics of the story. So, as a writer, it is very important that you decide what kind of story you want to tell and who is the best person to either lead that story, not necessarily has to be the perspective of that person, depending on what kind of dynamic that you do want for your story, but be the leader if you have a group like this kind of story where it's a group of people going on a journey together, a group of friends. You have to decide who's going to be the leader if there's going to be one, because that will change the dynamic of what the characters do together. And you also have to decide what point of view is going to best complement the kind of story that you want with this leader involved. Do you want it to be the leader's point of view, or do you want it to be the friend's point of view, or do you want it to be the one that has no concerns in the world like Tas kind of thing? As well as a reader, the whole reason that you like this book, the whole reason that you like the story and want to see where it goes is because of Tanis being the leader, doing the things that he does, leading them to where they go, and the point of view of seeing his reactions to items, seeing how he decides things, seeing what he sees, where he wants to go, and why. This connection between being the leader and the point of view makes the story cohesive, makes the story grounded, makes the story what it is, which is why it's important to the reader as well as a writer to decide what's going to happen and what you want the reader to feel. And as a reader, this is the result of why you like your story, why you feel the way you do feel because of these decisions. And so I feel like it's really good to start with a book that has a lot of characters, a lot of dynamics that we are reading first, to see what kind of decisions it takes to make the book so successful. Which again leads me again to my next question, or more like topic, about relationships. I'd really like to delve into the relationships that these characters show, the most prominent ones that we've got here. And I've got quite a few that I'd like to discuss. But first I'd like to talk about the importance of relationships in the story. The dynamics of a relationship and the relationships that the characters have changes the tension, changes the plot, changes everything about this story. It is all held together by relationships, by the characters, by everything that happens, because these relationships exist, if that makes any sense at all. As an author, you build these dynamics of tension or cohesion through the characters' relationships. You build characters and their personalities through these relationships. So they are very, very important. Consider this. We have Raslin constantly on the edge of this group because nobody seems to trust him other than his brother. That dynamic makes it a whole tension build between the group. We've got Goldmoon and Riverwind, who at first, through the first several chapters, are on the edge of the group. Even Raslin is more included than these strangers are. Part of it is their own decision, and part of it is that they don't know them. They don't understand. They don't work together. They've never done anything. So we have that tension. So as a writer, it is important to decide where the tensions are going to be with these relationships, as well as where are we going to have cohesion and where are we going to have easy accessibility to these characters and these relationships and going through this plot. As a reader, this tension and these relationships make us wonder if this group is going to make it. We constantly are wondering with Strum on his being moody and whatever he's been through the last couple of chapters. We see the Raslin's issues. We see Goldmoon and Riverwind's issues. We see all these different dynamics. And we wonder, is the group going to make it? Are we going to continue with these friendships? Is this going to be okay? How is this going to affect their journey and if they're going to make it? And things like that. So that's why relationships are very, very important. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of them. First, I'm going to start with Flint and Tass, because as you read at least the first couple of chapters, you don't realize until chapters 6 and onward that Flint and Tass are actually very close. And it's very subtle, at least at the beginning, is that you don't realize how close these two characters are because they're always bickering. Tass always seems like he's picking on Flint. Tass always seems to be annoying Flint. Flint always seems to be yelling at Tass, and they always seem to be almost like cats and dogs chasing after one another, back and forth. So I feel like that relationship is important in the fact that you are misreading it. At least I misread it through the first several chapters, and then you see, no, these two are actually very important to each other. These two, it's their way of showing that they care about each other, that they do fight all the time, that they have that relationship that's, I'm sure you all have someone like that, where you just like to annoy them, and that is the way that you show your love and your care for them. So it's a really interesting dynamic because you see the pain and suffering that they put each other through as a part of telling each other that how much they like each other. And obviously it gets on everybody else's nerves, just like Tanis constantly has to tell him to shut up in that cave and things like that throughout the several chapters that we've read. You keep seeing Tanis having to correct Tass, and you keep seeing Flint complain about Tass. But then as it goes through and as we continue to read, if you haven't caught it yet, you will continue to see that Flint and Tanis are actually very, very close, much more close than you'd think in the beginning. So again, we have that's a relationship that really looks like it could be tension, but it's really a cohesion. It really is a solid bond that you don't have to worry about. The next one is, like I've mentioned before, Goldmoon and Riverwind versus the group. So we've got this friendship group here, and we've got these two outsiders that are close. And so you have to see how they work themselves into this group. They don't want to work themselves into this group at first. Well, Goldmoon is okay about it, but Riverwind really does not want to trust anybody else. He's got a lot of prejudices against people who aren't human. And so it has that tension and that wondering of how this is going to work. How are we going to make it so these two people integrate into this group that has been together for what it seems like a very, very long time. And as we see later in the chapters, it mentions that Flint and Tanis have been together a lot longer than everybody else because they are the oldest and they've known each other the longest. So they've already had time to build their friendships and their relationships and their trust. But Goldmoon and Riverwind, they don't. So we see that tension. We see the constant of not sure who is going to do what. Almost attacking Strum because he doesn't want to have Strum watch over Goldmoon when Riverwind felt like he should do it himself. And we see Tanis trying to walk on eggshells around them, trying to figure out what's going to set them off, what's not going to set them off. How do we feel about these people who we've decided to help just from not knowing them at all? So it really causes tension and dissent, and we see as a reader that we don't know what's going to happen, who's going to crack under the strain, whether they're going to continue together, whether they're not going to continue together, how will it affect the story. And as a writer, that's what you want. You want this tension to cause questions, and then you decide which way you're going to take this relationship and whether it's going to work or not work with the story that you are trying to build. The next one I want to talk about is Strum versus the group, because Strum in these chapters is on the outside a little bit of this group. His tension is high within himself and is causing him to clash with his friends. Tanis even mentions how he has very strong pride, how he does not like chaos, he doesn't like stuff that he doesn't know about. So it takes a strain on him, and now it is straining him with the group. He just has had it. His patience has been lost, and he is not up for any more games. He's had enough of them. So it causes trouble with his other relationships because he is trying to think of this. But at the same time, the group includes this. They know this about him and they include him. So it's a bit of tension. We see a little bit of pulling, but a little bit of the other characters trying to push forward with him, to go with him when he pulls away because they care about him. Especially you see this with Tanis because we see him mostly from his point of view, but also because he really understands Strum. He knows what he's like. He knows that he needs either his time alone or he needs his needs to be put in this certain position, to have these certain things done for him, to trust him when he goes after the white stag, because he knows that this is how it will work to work with the group. But it almost seems like he's on the outside. And I find that really interesting considering all the other characters don't see him as an outsider, but he is causing tension with his own friends. I even have a little quote here that I wrote down that that Strum from himself actually mentions. I find very interesting. It talks about, it's on page 68, at least in my volume. It says, while Strum followed the code, Tanis lived. And I thought this was really interesting to point out for Tanis and Strum's relationship. Their bond is stronger than his bond with the rest of the group. He does not get so frustrated with Tanis. He gets frustrated with Flint and Tass and Caramon and Raslin and even the outsiders that he doesn't know. But his relationship with Tanis remains strong because he doesn't even know. He even mentions himself how he does not know why, but he really admires Tanis, and he follows Tanis, even though Tanis is not a knight. He's not someone who is some kind of lord or anything like that. He is just a half-elf, someone who doesn't even fit into either category, either elf or human. But he is his friend, and he admires him, respects him, and feels like where Strum tries to live the best life he can, Tanis is living that life. And I think that hold between Strum and Tanis is what really keeps Strum in the group and keeps the dynamics where they fit strongly, where he can continue to grow closer to the others. And at times like this, Raslin even seems like he might be closer to the group than Strum, which in a moment we'll talk about Raslin versus the group. But it's kind of interesting how the one who is least trusted has somehow integrated himself more into the group than someone who is highly trusted in the group's friendships. So let's go ahead and transition into Raslin and the group and see where we see that dynamic as well. My biggest question when it comes to Raslin is, why does he stay with the group? Every single time I read it, I always wonder, why does Raslin stay with the group? It doesn't seem like he likes being in this group. It doesn't seem like he cares about the people in the group. It doesn't seem like he has much connection to any of them other than his twin brother, and that his twin brother is not one that he really wants to have a connection to. He is mistrusted by most of them, especially now that he's so changed, but it seemed like even before, no one really trusted him because he seemed suspicious. He's always had a wanting for this power. So my question has always been, why does Raslin stay with this group when he is so clearly on the edge of the group, so out of sync with all the other people in his friends, if you can count them as his friends, journeys and things like that? He does not have a working relationship with any of them, really. He just seems to go along because that is what he's always done, maybe? And even then, I'm not so sure what his motivations are. But I do think it will be interesting to see as we go along and continue to look at the relationship between Raslin and this group, because he doesn't give anybody loyalty. He treats his brother rotten. He treats everybody else rotten, and yet they all care about him. They all, well, I can't necessarily say all of them care about him, but they all don't leave him behind. They all check on him. Caramon obviously is the one that truly takes care of him and does all that stuff for him. And actually you can tell that he really truly does love his brother. But everybody else seems to not want to have him there, but still helps him out. And so we've got the tension, but at the same time, it seems like he fits with everybody else. So I am not really sure what to make of this this relationship. And so it's really an interesting dynamic. It adds another layer on top of our other relationships to always constantly wonder Raslin's motivation, Raslin's feelings, Raslin's choices. Because really we don't see, especially from it not being from his point of view much at all, see why he sticks with this group, why he sort of considers them friends, I guess. I'm not really sure if Raslin considers anybody a friend, but he does consider himself part of this group and continues to go with this group. So that one I don't really have totally an answer to right now, or a point on whether we a clear answer on what we see from this, but it is definitely another dynamic, and it does continue the tension, continues wondering what's going to happen, and continuing to know where we're at and how we stand because of this. So as a reader, we're constantly asking these questions, we're constantly wondering who Raslin is and what he is doing, and as well as a writer, you are making the reader uncomfortable with this matchup. You're making them decide what they want out of this relationship. What are they hoping for? What do they want to get to in the end? What tension do they want released, or do they want it to break? And then the last relationship I wanted to talk about just very briefly because it's not totally developed yet, but is between Flint and Tanis. Because toward the end we do see that Flint has a more of a vulnerable, sorry if I could speak, vulnerable moment with Tanis, where he mentions how old he is and how everyone else is so young, but how Tanis feels the same way, and yet he can count on Flint to be his rock, as he called him, where he could lend his back to and fight his enemies, someone who would support him and help him out. So again, I just wanted to touch briefly on that one. I don't have too much because it's just starting to bud, starting to see it. You saw a little bit at the beginning when they first met up, but for the most part, didn't see too much of the dynamic there. But then now we're starting to see it come in their developing characters, and so I just wanted to mention it so that way as we continue to go through, we can see whether it is a coherent relationship, one that causes tension, or what exactly is the deal with this relationship, and what does it add to our story from a writer and a reader's point of view. Sorry, I know that my light is kind of dimming here as the video goes on. I'm losing my light. Hopefully I can continue through the rest of the video and you can still see me okay. So sorry again if I continue to slowly darken and darken and darken. Alright, the next topic I wanted to address is languages. Because even though we don't have too much going on with languages quite yet, we are starting to see them getting developed. And as most fantasies do, at least for high fantasy, most high fantasies have languages that are important parts of the story, because we do have these other creatures and beings that have their own languages, just like we have people from other countries that have their own languages in this world. And it is important because these languages don't exist to know how to handle them. So something like Lord of the Rings that we have that has a completely developed language. He completely wrote a new language and incorporated it into his story. And as we see in the movies as well as the books, he really puts that to effect because we have developed these languages. We can use them in the movies where they actually speak, and we use subtitles just like we would for trying to portray someone who is like Hispanic or French or whatever else. We would just have them speak in that language and do subtitles to build authenticity. And then we have, like in the book, where you can actually put that language in and just translate it afterward, but you actually show that there is these actual words that develop and are a part of this language and this culture. And it kind of helps define the Elvish culture or the Orc culture or whatever else, because you see what kind of language that they have that goes along with them. And then you have ones like this book, where we don't have a full language necessarily, but they do incorporate different little phrases of the language into the writing, as well as then sometimes you just say, hey, these people are speaking in this language, and not actually putting the words in there. So it is important to know how to handle languages because of believability. You have to make the reader believe that this language exists, that it makes sense, that it has rules to it, that there is grammar, that it doesn't look like it's really Spanish in disguise or something like that. You have to make this made-up language seem like there is a consistency. There are similar words that you would use. There is a pattern to what people are saying. Things like that when you actually incorporate the language into it, as well as not being so stingy that you would just say everyone is saying this in this language, and then that also becomes a not believability because they're like, oh, well, this person doesn't really know what this language is. We are just stating that it's another language. So it's really important to know how to handle languages as a writer, as well as being able to understand and believe the language as a reader. I believe Margaret Rice and Tracy Hickman do a good balance between actually using the language and then switching to between saying that they are just speaking in this language. For example, Goldmoon and Riverwind. When we're from Goldmoon's perspective, we just say that they were speaking in the barbaric language because it's from Goldmoon's perspective. So it would not seem like a foreign language to hear to her. It just seems like the natural language, which for us is English. So you can't really say from Goldmoon's perspective that she's speaking all these nonsense words, at least to us it's nonsense words, when we're trying to make the believability that it's from her perspective and that she understands this and it's not just some foreign language to her ears. Versus when Razlan does his spells, we hear him say the words because for everybody else, we don't know what this language is. We don't know what this means. Or even sometimes when Razlan's point of view, we get the words because they might be made up. Or they might be something symbolic versus actually a language. So for him, he's saying this word. As well as could also be because his main language is not this one. So he still is thinking of it as a separate language. So languages are important for believability in how we use them as a reader, how we believe and take them and understand them if we do need to understand them, things like that. As well as it also can hold mystery if you have Tanis walk away and talk to somebody else in Elvish, but we only, the character who is the point of view is from, only hears this and he doesn't understand. It also adds that ambiguity. So how you use it and how you develop the language is really important. So we have my list here of how many that we have so far. We've got the Solomonic language. We've got the Barbarians language, which we don't really know. They're the Plains people. I don't know exactly what kind of language it is considered to be. And then we've got Razlan's magic language. And we've got the Clerics, who we don't really have any idea what that one's like. They just mentioned that they were speaking in a strange language, which again contributes to the mystery. We're like, what's happening? What is being said? Nobody understands. This language is completely different than any other language that has been known to them before. And again, that adds to this is a foreign thing. This is a mysterious thing. And it's like a puzzle that needs to be solved. And then we've got, looks like those are the main ones that have been mentioned so far. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on the use of languages, whether you like the addition of the actual words and phrases in the language, if that takes away from you. Do you feel like you need it translated? Do they not always translate it for you? I feel like for the most part, if you need to know what they're saying, they either translate it or they use a way to make it where they just write it in English. So they do an excellent job of that for me. But of course, you are different than me, so I was really wondering what you think about it, how you feel about languages in general. Do you think that to have a language you need to have an entire language written out like Lord of the Rings does? Or do you want just kind of snippets here and there and you don't really care if it's a full language as long as it's believable for you? As well as a writer's perspective. Do you want to make a whole language? Do you find that intimidating? Do you like that there's these options? Or would you prefer that the only option be to go ahead and do a full language? Let me know in the comments below. I really would like to know your opinions on that. And the last main topic before we get into the nitty-gritty of actually events that happen in the chapters I'd like to discuss is the rules of the fantasy world. This is such an important topic. So important. Because without this world, this story could not exist. The characters could not exist. Nothing could exist without the fantasy world. It being developed and it being realistic. I put quotes because obviously their magic and things like that are not realistic, but meaning realistic in the fact of believability from the audience. We already know that the audience is going to suspend their disbelief in the fact that magic can exist and dragons can exist and all these other things can exist because they're reading a fantasy and that's what they enjoy reading. But we do need to make it so it seems like it is a real world that could possibly exist if these type of things could happen. For example, if magic is going to exist, there has to be some kind of logic to it, not necessarily saying logic in the fact that 1 + 1 = 2 is logical, but in the fact that it follows some sort of rules. Not necessarily a science rule, but some kind of consistency that this is the way the world works, where because we as humans like to classify that this is how things work. This is why this is the way it is. So if we have magic in the world, we can't accept that magic works where you can wave a wand and it will just work, versus, and then sometimes you can go ahead and just speak some words and it works, or sometimes, you know, you have to rest afterward, but sometimes you don't. Like, it has to have some kind of continuity to it, something that holds this world together, and we can define this world works like this, and this is how it has to happen every single time. So that is why it's important to build these rules, to have the reader understand how your world works. So that way they will have the believability to say, hey, this world could exist and these things could possibly happen, because it happens the same way every single time when we're dealing with things that we don't know. So we've got the fact that wizards must be rest after the spells, as well as they must rememorize them after they've used them. So that is the way that we were saying that this world works. We're saying that Raslin cannot just, you know, sling off 5 spells and not take a nap afterward, or cannot eat afterward, or cannot at least sit down afterward. He has to rest and has to recuperate, because it takes a lot of physical energy. And we're saying that, yes, he can use these spells, but he can't use them every single time no matter what he wants. He has to rememorize them before he can use them again, which is actually sounds very, very tedious to me and a lot of work. But now we've clearly defined it, and we clearly see 2 or 3 times now that this is the case. We see Raslin memorizing his spell books. We see Raslin, after 3 or 4 times now we've seen him use magic, every time afterward he is drained and needs to rest and goes to sleep instantly. So we do see that the fantasy world is not only being built, but it is also following the rules that Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman have decided that it needs to follow. So we do have believability, and we can continue with this world and say that yes, this world could exist as a reader's point of view. So I will talk more about, you know, building rules in a fantasy type setting and things like that in my writing videos, which the next one will be coming later this week. So if you want more discussion on that, go ahead and just wait out a little bit for me to get to a full episode on that. But I just wanted to touch on it, that this is an important thing for us to notice and to understand as we move forward with the story. The rules actually do affect the plot, because we have to know that if Raslin does this, he has to rest, and it'll affect all the other characters around him through those events. So so it really is important, even to the reader, to know what the rules are, to know how it will affect the rest of the characters happening around them. All right, now let's get to the nitty-gritty. We've got the first point I'd like to talk about is the encounter with the strange clerics. This scene is our first view of a battle with all of the characters. So we had a little bit of a excursion before with the Viewmaster Toad and his henchmen, but this is our first time seeing the whole group fight in a mini battle here against several opponents. So that's the reason I picked this scene to go over, because I felt like it was important to discuss the battle, especially with the point of view. In this scene, we are switching back and forth between many different characters and their point of view. We constantly are seeing different timing in the battle. So we have one time with one character, the same exact time with another character, and then we move forward with even another character after these 2 things have already happened, and we're switching back and forth, going through, and it really does seem like chaos because of all the switches that we have. We're over here, and then we're over there, and then we're seeing it from this point of view, and this point of view, and these thoughts, and that is very crazy how everything is going back and forth, which really helps understanding the chaos that comes in a battle. I feel like Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman really did a good job on this battle with doing that point of view and having it be just chaos, because battles are known to be chaos. You're just fighting the enemies, so kill or be killed kind of thing. And we see all the different characters as they're split up from each other, just trying to fight and survive an enemy that they have never fought before. So they are as confused on what these creatures are and how the best way to fight them are, as well as being in different places and trying to shout to each other for help and going around these different areas. So battles are really important to focus on because they can be easily, easily disbelieved? Is that how I want to say it? It can be easily thought of as unreal, that they are fake. They are not written correctly. They're not written in a good way. So it's really important that we have enough action that we can tell the battle is happening and what is going on, and we can picture it as a reader. But also a writer has to then contend with, how do I write this battle without having known how to fight in some cases? And most cases, actually, like never been in battle, never been knowing how to fight with swords or any weapons of any kind. So you have to try and give enough detail to be believable and for the reader to tell what's happening and be able to picture it, as well as enough of a give that the author does not have to make things up that seem unrealistic. So it's really a tough balance to come across, and that's why the point of views is really nice, because you're jumping from scene to scene to scene and going snippet here, snippet here, snippet here, snippet here. So that way it can really seem believable. We're going around, we got the chaos portion of it, and we don't have to stress about, as from the writer's point of view, doesn't have to stress about what kind of details and how realistic they are. As well as it's just a good scene to do character building, because now we see how all these characters are working together. They all, when push comes to shove, they all come together and they all help each other out. We've got the twins fighting together, which you know that usually Razlan does not treat Caramon very well, but they're working together. He and his brother trust him implicitly, knowing that even though Razlan is more of a frail person, even though he usually needs Caramon's help, that Caramon actually can rely on him when the time comes to it. Same thing with Goldmoon and Riverwind. They both are with these strangers, but in the end, they come to their aid. They help Goldmoon and Riverwind out when they're in a jam, or when Goldmoon was being surrounded. They were trying to help her. Caramon starts to help her before he gets attacked himself. Strum is attacked, and Tanis runs to his aid. That kind of thing. So everyone works together, and you see how this team and these relationships are when another aspect. Because, I mean, just imagine if Razlan was like, hey, I don't care about you people. I'm going. I don't care. Just fend for yourselves. I'm not going to be part of this battle. Or even if he just sat there and was like, hey, you guys take care of it. I'm just going to sit here and wait it out. Or anybody else. Or if Riverwind and Goldmoon was like, hey, we don't care about you people. We've had enough danger. We don't trust you. We're getting out of here. See you later. Have a nice life. That would be a completely different battle. It'd be a completely different type of character. It'd be completely different everything. So battles are important for character building. They're important for making believable. You have to make sure that you make it as believable as possible while still being in your realm of knowledge. And you have to make the reader believe the battle. Make the reader understand what's happening, as well as enough chaos that it seems like a battle, one that's realistic and can still easily be imagined and things like that. So that balance is very hard to get, but Margaret Rice and Tracy Hammond do a really, really good job, at least in that scene. We'll have to see as we go on what more battles there are and how they handle it. And then my last topic for today was going to be Darken Wood. So Strum follows the stag to Darken Wood, and I feel like this is important because Darken Wood really represents the world building and the rules that the world belongs to. Is another section of just that kind of building of this world. We're still building. And with fantasy, which is really interesting, is that the world is always being built. You never finish building the world. There are still aspects that your readers are not going to know, and you're going to fill in as you go along. You're going to see new areas, you're going to see new people, you're going to see new everything, and you're going to continue to build this world and continue to make its rules up as you go along. And that is the best way to progress through the story, because you don't want all your information all at once, and it's supposed to be revealed to you slowly as you go through. You still learn new things, you still have these new things, and that's what keeps it interesting. So we have both the dead in Darken Wood, as well as living mystical creatures that you don't see in the rest of the world. At least that's the impression that you were given from Tanis's point of view, is that, hey, when he sees the centaurs, he's like, man, these are centaurs, and it made it seem like he does not see those every day. Obviously, we don't know for certain because he didn't say so, but the impression that he gives you is that you don't see these every day. You don't see the dead. Only in Darken Wood do you see the dead. And so it's a very interesting dynamic that we have in this woods. We've got the rumors that this place is terrible, and then they actually get there, it's more lively than any place they've been recently. Like the rest of the woods, there's no animals, no nothing, but they reach Darken Wood, the actual portion that is called Darken Wood, and there's animals in the trees, and they're fluttering around or whatever, and it seems like a really happy, joyful place, versus the rumors of, hey, this is where death is, and nobody who goes in comes out. So it's all really a mixture of different things that are continuing to build this world. And so another reason that it is important for this world building to continue is because your readers are going to love it. So I already mentioned that it's important because your readers are always discovering new things, you're always going to new places, things like that. But it's really important because a lot of people read for the plot and the world and the characters. So when you continue to world build and you continue to character build, that is really aimed at the readers and what the readers want to see and what actually makes up a story. The setting is one of the main things that make up the story. So without this setting, we couldn't have this story. And personally for me, when I read for fun, I don't really look to see deeper meanings. I don't really try to look for a lot of hidden elements. Yes, as I continue to read books over and over again, I tend to start to see them. And yes, when I really love it, I do try to, really understand and work with the text. But at the same time, the enjoyment of reading is understanding the story and seeing the world unfold and all these other things. And so that is what is important for other people who are like me, who just love reading for the aspect of knowing the story and knowing the events and having the plot move forward with these characters and seeing these settings that they come to. World building is what moves the plot along. You might think that the plot is what moves the plot along, but really the plot has to sit somewhere. So we have to have these settings and these places for these events to happen in order to continue moving forward with the story. So world building is part of the main reason that stories exist. And so as we continue going forward, the reader is going to love and enjoy and get their fulfillment from seeing more of this world and going through the adventure of this world in particular. So of course, again, I'm going to do more in depth on world building and those kind of things like plot in my lessons for writing. There we go. So stay tuned for that, and we'll talk about it a bit more in depth then. But I just really wanted to go over these things because of how important it is even to a reader. From a reader's perspective, it is the whole thing that starts making up the book is the setting and the plot and things like that. So having cool things to learn about this world, having the dead come to life, or having centaurs in the forest, or that there's a forest master. This is all stuff that will intrigue and be important to a reader. And the writer has to then be like, hey, what kind of fun things and interesting things can I put in here? Because that is the joy and the privilege of fantasy, is that you don't have to stick to what we know in this real world. That is the reason that we read it, is because we want the excitement of this imaginary world. What if this world could hold centaurs? What if we could have the dead come back to life? What if we had elves and dwarves and kinder and all these things? And that is what the genre is all about. It's having these elements in them. So the world and these creatures must be there in order for us to enjoy this genre for the reasons that we enjoy it. So it's from both sides. The writers can love being a god in a sense and creating these worlds and these creatures and these ideas and thinking, what if a world was like this, and bringing it to life, as well as the readers who love and enjoy feeling the adventures that come from worlds that we do not know and cannot exist in our everyday existence. So for both ends, it's really important for both sides to have these interactions and these scenes like this that also move the plot along as we're going through. All right, and that is it for today on chapters 6 through 10. Hopefully you enjoyed everything that I've discussed. Please leave any comments below on anything that you like to discuss with me, or any feedback you have, or anything else that you'd like to talk about. I'd be happy and more than willing to discuss it with you. Next week we are going to be doing chapters 11 through 15, which is pages 117 through 173, at least in my copy of the book. So I hope that you continue to enjoy the next set of chapters, and that you have a glorious couple of days until Wednesday for our next video. Hopefully you'll join us for that. We're going to be doing the first writing video on plot and the importance of plot and how plot works and everything like that. So hopefully you'll join me for that. And yeah, so thank you for joining me. I will see you next time, and have a great day. Bye!